You're muted, Shashwin.
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari.
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girvaradhari.
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari.
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girvaradhari.
Jaya Yamuna Tira Vanajari.
Jaya Yamuna Tira Vanachari.
Yamuna Tira No, Mataji, sorry. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana.
Yashodanandana Praja Janaranjana.
Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana.
Yashodanandana Praja Janaranjana.
Yamuna Tira Vanajari.
Yamuna Tira Vanachari.
Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana.
Yashodanandana Praja Janaranjana.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Shashwin. Hare Krishna, Mataji, Dandavat Pranam. Please accept our humble obeisances on behalf of everybody who have joined the group and are about to join, Mataji.
Thank you so much.
We are in the Srimad Bhagavatam. We are on Canto 1, Chapter 9, and today we are on the last text of Chapter 9, which is the passing away of Bhishma Dev. We are on text 49. Mataji, how would you like us to continue? Would you like us to read the text, translation and purport and do the Mangalacharan, or would you like to take over?
No, that's fine. Please do the text and the translation and the Mangalacharan prayers. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna. Shashwin, are you able to do the text 49, starting from Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya?
Yes, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shlokir Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Hare Krishna. Charu Raja Vasudevanumodita Yakara Rajyam Dharmena Pitrpaita Maham Vibhu.
Hare Krishna. Would anybody like to do the word-to-word translation and purport? Okay, I'll do the word to word. Pitra by his uncle Dhritarashtra. Cha and Anumataha with his approval. Raja King Yudhishthira. Vasudeva Anumodita confirmed by Lord Shri Krishna. Chakara executed. Rajyam the kingdom. Dharmena in compliance with the codes of royal principle. Pitra father. Paitamanam forefathers. Vibhuha as great as. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. After this, the great religious king, Maharaj Yudhishthira, executed the royal power in the kingdom strictly according to the codes and royal principles approved by his uncle and confirmed by Lord Shri Krishna. Purport. Maharaj Yudhishthira was not a mere tax collector. He was always conscious of his duty as a king, which is no less than that of a father or spiritual master. The king is to see to the welfare of the citizens from all angles of social, political, economic, and spiritual upliftment. The king must know that the human life is meant for liberating the engaged soul from the bondage of material conditions, and therefore his duty is to see that the citizens are properly looked after to attain this highest stage of perfection. Maharaj Yudhishthira followed these principles strictly, as will be seen from the next chapter. Not only did he follow the principles, but he also got approval from his old uncle, who was experienced in political affairs, and that was also confirmed by Lord Krishna, the speaker of philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. Maharaj Yudhishthira is the ideal monarch, and monarchy under a trained king like Maharaj Yudhishthira is by far the most superior form of government, superior to modern republics of government of the people, by the people. The mass of people, especially in the age of Kali, and all born Shudras, basically low-born, ill-trained, unfortunate, and badly associated. They themselves do not know the highest perfectional aim of life. Therefore, votes cast by them actually have no value, and thus persons elected by such irresponsible votes cannot be responsible representatives like Maharaj Yudhishthira. Thus ends the Bhakti Vedanta purport of the first canto, 9th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Passing Away of Bhishma Dev in the Presence of Lord Krishna. Hare Krishna. Shobha Mataji, would you like to do the Manglacharan? Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Yes, I'll do the Manglacharan. Hare Krishna, and my humble obeisances to Adi Ganga Mataji and all the devotees. Thank you. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopeshtam Thapitam Yena Bhutale Vayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadanti Vandeham Shri Guruho Shri Yutapadakkamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu दीनबन्धु जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कान्त राधाकान्त नमोस्तुते तप्त काञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Mataji, for the wonderful Mangalacharan recital. Hare Krishna, Mataji, we hand over to you now. Thank you very much for joining and giving your precious time to us. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Girdika Mataji, and thank you, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to join you again, and please give me your blessings so that I can speak on this wonderful verse for my own purification. So today, as Girdika Mataji said, we're speaking on the last verse of this chapter, the final verse, verse 49 of chapter 9, canto 1. And before we go on to unpack the verse and purport, I thought I would first of all try and establish who Maharaj Yudhishthira really is, and go through some of his pastimes and glorify him a little, because he is an exceptional character. And this purport is about him, actually, as we go on to the 10th chapter, in which his reign is going to be elaborated on. So Maharaj Yudhishthira is described as the best of kings, an ideal personality. He was very, very focused. The sthira syllable in his name, Yudhishthira, means steadiness or strength. So he was firm, he was fixed, and he was one of those people who knew the difference between dharma and adharma, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And he was also honest to a fault, and he's so truthful, he never actually lied, except for the one time when Krishna asked him to lie. Does anyone know that story of when Krishna asked Maharaj Yudhishthira to tell a lie?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Girdika Mataji. Would you like to relate?
Yes, I'll just say it very shortly
Yes,
so that you can elaborate. So when Yudhishthira Maharaj said Narova Kunjurova, so when was asked whether who died and whether it was the elephant or the sun.
Yes.
And he said Narova Kunjurava. I do not know whether it was the man or the animal.
Yes, no, thank you. That is exactly the pastime I was thinking of. And it's funny because I had a different version of the story. It's very similar to yours, but it's slightly different. So, you know, it's the instance when Dronacharya was leading the Kaurava army, and he was, you know, causing chaos among the Pandava soldiers, you know. And so Lord Krishna, he was the one who devised the plan to make sure the Pandavas weren't defeated. And he reminded the Pandavas how Dronacharya had promised that he would stop fighting if he heard something unpleasant. And Krishna suggested that Yudhishthira, who was always known for telling the truth, you know, he suggested that he tell a lie, and that Ashvatthama, Dronacharya's son, had been killed. And upon hearing the suggestion, Bhim, immediately went and killed the elephant, as you were saying, you know, the elephant that was called Ashvatthama. Then he started very loudly shouting, Ashvatthama is dead, Ashvatthama is dead. And so then Dronacharya went to Yudhishthira to confirm whether that news is true or not. And Yudhishthira said, yes, Ashvatthama is dead. But under his breath, you know, not audibly, not so people could hear, he said, Ashvatthama the elephant. So, you know, he couldn't tell an untruth under any circumstances. So he did tell a lie to Dronacharya, but it was in the service of the absolute truth, you know, in the service of Krishna. So yeah, thank you very much, Kirtika Mataji. So yeah, Yudhishthira was also famous as someone whose enemy was never born. So he's so pious that no one hated him. And he was known as the personification of goodness, you know, because through his continuous service to Lord Krishna, he actually didn't have any desire for sense gratification. He wasn't ambitious. He didn't want personal wealth or fame or power. And, you know, kind of it's this kind of selflessness that, you know, kind of made him worthy to become, you know, not just a king, but also the emperor of the world. So it's that kind of, you know, lack of personal gratification that's made him so famous. And as a qualified and superlative leader, he was focused on the welfare of his citizens. And he had such a perfect administration that, you know, kind of even the rivers and the oceans and the hills and the forests were all pleased with him. And they supplied all necessities to the people. And this you'll find out more about in the 10th chapter, so I don't want to elaborate on this too much. But during the reign of King Yudhishthira, the citizens of the world never lacked anything. You know, they were undisturbed by mental agonies. You know, they didn't have diseases, and they weren't, you know, kind of disturbed by excessive heat or cold. You know, even the weather played ball in his reign, because, you know, he's so pious and you know, so dutiful in his pure devotion to God. And like all the saintly kings of the Vedic age, Yudhishthira renounced his kingdom at the end of his life. And the reason was to devote himself to spiritual practice. So he installed Parikshit Maharaj as the emperor of the world and left for the north. And his devotion to Lord Krishna was so pure that even before relinquishing his body, he achieved the highest spiritual abode. So I'm going to ask everyone, does anyone know the story of how Yudhishthira was the only one who did not have to give up his body before attaining, you know, the higher abode at the end of his life? Does anyone know that story?
Mataji, Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
I can't remember the exact story, but I know they were all, the Pandavas and Draupadi, they were all walking up, and one by one they succumbed to the challenges. And each time one of them fell, the reason was given as to why they fell. But it's only Yudhishthira Maharaj who could go right up to the holy Dham, and he was able to do that. But I think there was still a bit of, because of the lie that he had told Dronacharya, there was still a test that he had to give to be able to enter the Dham.
Absolutely, that's perfect, Panchali Mataji. That's exactly what happened. So just to elaborate on what you were saying, the Pandavas renounced their kingdom. They went to the Himalayas, and they were walking together in the mountains. And after a while, Draupadi fell down, but Yudhishthira and his brothers did not stop. And so Bhim asked Yudhishthira, you know, for what sin has Draupadi fallen on the ground? And Yudhishthira replied, this is the result of her partiality for Arjun, because of her favoritism for Arjun. And then Sahadev fell, and Yudhishthira explained that the reason Sahadev fell was, you know, because his sin was pride. He thought he was the wisest of all. And then the next to fall was Nakul. And to Bhim's query, Yudhishthira's answer was that Nakul was always conscious of his good looks. And when Arjun fell next, Yudhishthira told Bhim, well, Arjun declared that he would single-handedly kill all his enemies in one day. And, you know, he couldn't fulfill that objective. It was a boast and he couldn't, you know, carry it through. And then it was finally Bhim's turn to fall. And, you know, kind of before he left his body, Bhim asked his brother, what sin had he committed? And Yudhishthira replied, you know, in the matter of eating, you were selfish. You never cared if other people needed food. You were just, you know, wanting to sort of fulfill your own kind of needs. And you also boasted about your own strength. And so, yeah, so everyone kind of fell on the ground and left their bodies, and Yudhishthira continued to walk, leaving them behind. And he was now followed by a dog. So when they had set off, they had been, you know, the 5 brothers, Draupadi and the dog. So there were 7 of them. And so he was the only human alive from among the Pandavas. And then suddenly Lord Indra descended in his chariots, landed in front of Yudhishthira, and he asked him to get onto his chariots and proceed to heaven. And Yudhishthira refused, saying that he wouldn't go to heaven unless he was accompanied by his brothers and Draupadi. And Indra said that they'd all gone to heaven, casting off their bodies. So Yudhishthira was the only one who was privileged enough to reach heaven without parting with his earthly form. And then kind of before he got onto the chariot, he kind of had an argument with Lord Indra about the dog. And he said, this dog has faithfully followed me to the end, so I don't want to leave him behind. And he insisted that he should also go with them. And it turns out that the dog was the god Dharmaraj. So, you know, kind of he'd come to test Yudhishthira, and he expressed his kind of pleasure, because Yudhishthira was actually his son, you know, so he's expressed his pleasure that Yudhishthira passed his test. So yeah, we can see how compassionate Yudhishthira was. He was not only willing, he was not willing to ascend to the heavenly planets without his brothers, but, you know, not even without the dog. So he was sinless. He didn't have to give up his body. However, as Banjali Mataji pointed out, he did have another test to go through. He went to hell very briefly. And this was because not that he lied so much, but because he didn't want to lie, even though the Supreme Personality of Godhead ordered him to do so. So it's important, you know, kind of, we think we should follow mundane morality, but if, you know, kind of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is ordering us to take an action, we should take it without hesitation. So he briefly had to see hell, but then he ascended after that. So, so in the 10th chapter of Canto 1, in the next chapter, verse 3, Prabhupada says he was comparable to Indra himself. You know, he was so pious, he had all the qualities of the demigods, even though he was a jiva, and he was fully trained in good leadership qualities, you know, a very guru-like king. So we've gone through quite a few of his qualities and, you know, kind of also touched on what happened at the end of his life. So we can go back to the beginning of this purport. And so the situation we have here is that Bhishma Dev has just left his body, and Yudhishthira is about to take up the mantle of king, or more accurately, world emperor. And, you know, for which he's undeniably qualified. And in the purport, we learn what the duty of a king is, you know, that he has to be no less than a father or a spiritual master. And there are 3 parts to this. A king has to, you know, firstly see to the welfare of the citizens from all angles of social, political, and economic and spiritual upliftment. And then secondly, he has to know that human life is meant for liberating the encaged soul from the bondage of material conditions. And thirdly, also from the purport, he also has to see that the citizens are properly looked after to attain this highest stage of perfection. And when we look at the verse itself, it says that King Yudhishthira executed those duties faithfully and without deviation of the principles. And this was approved by his uncle and sanctioned by Krishna. So this is a glimpse of Maharaj Yudhishthira's kingly reign, which followed Bhishma Dev's death. And it's a bit of a preview to the next chapter, chapter 10, in which his reign is more elaborately described. So let's look at his first duty. So as described in the purport, it was to look after the welfare of the citizens. And this relates to the social angle. In other words, how all the citizens, you know, kind of were situated and how they related to each other within their different classes, you know, starting with the intelligent class, the Brahmanas, the administrative class, or the Kshatriyas, and the mercantile class, or the Vaishyas, and lastly, the labor class, who are called the Sudras. And it also relates to looking after the welfare from the political angle, which means that he had to keep the kingdom's boundaries safe, you know, from invasion, and also the economic angle. Everyone was appropriately engaged in work according to their natural inclinations, and also the spiritual side, because of his devotion to Lord Krishna, all the conditioned souls got a chance to follow his example and become self-realized souls. And his second duty was to know that human life is meant for liberating the engaged soul from the bondage of material conditions. So in a lecture in Los Angeles in 1973, Prabhupada, you know, reiterates that the king is not there just to supply everyone's material necessities and provide a secure and stable environment economically and politically, but he's also responsible for their level of spiritual attainment. And he says, so the citizens which have mistakenly come to the world to enjoy sense gratification should be trained up in such a way that they can go back home, back to Godhead. That is king's responsibility. Similarly, that is father's responsibility, and that is guru's, spiritual master's responsibility. And again, in a Rune conversation in July 1973, he says, it's the duty of the king to see that everyone is discharging according to his responsibility. A Brahmana is acting exactly like a Brahmana. The Kshatriya is acting exactly like a Kshatriya, like that. It is the duty of a king to see that nobody's unemployed. Everyone is engaged in his own occupational duty, and they must feel security of life. That is perfect king. So Varna ashram is important in developing the God consciousness of the people, you know, the God consciousness of us. Does everyone know what the Varna ashram system is? Can anyone describe it to me? No? So we haven't heard of Varna ashram system?
Hare Krishna.
Oh, Hare Krishna, Hare Govinda Prabhu.
Mataji is Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra.
Wonderful.
And Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyasa. This is Varna Ashrama.
Perfect, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Thank you. So as Prabhu said, there are 4 Varnas and 4 ashrams. And Varna refers to the 4 orders of social life. As we've said, this is the Brahmanas, who are the priests, the teachers, the intellectuals, and the Kshatriyas, whose occupational duty, you know, can be in the army, it can be in the police, it can be in administration. So they are the leaders and the protectors. And then the Vaishyas, who are the farmers and merchants and business people. And then the Sudras, who are the artisans and the workers, you know, the craftspeople and everything like that. And then so those are the 4 Varnas, the social orders, and the 4 spiritual orders called ashrams are designed for natural progress in spiritual realization. So they are Brahmacharya, which is the student life, and Grihastha, household life, Vanaprastha, which is retirement, and finally Sannyas, which is renunciation. So both Varna and ashram are very important. You know, it's important to choose the right Varna for one who wants to advance. You know, everyone is meant to work according to their natural inclinations. So Brahmanas work as Brahmanas and Sudras work as Sudras. But the duty of everyone is to ascend to the level of Brahmana. So, you know, we can't stop at being, you know, Sudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya. Everyone has to ascend to the level of Brahmana, because that's what Krishna consciousness is about, to make everyone into a Brahmana. And then ashram, we're supposed to choose an ashram that most meets our needs. You know, no one should be outside of an ashram when they're practicing, you know, spiritual life. Some choose the Brahmachari ashram, and many of us are grahastas. You know, we choose household life, and, you know, later on we go into vanaprastha, and then, you know, some after that will go on to become renunciants in the form of sannyasis after vanaprastha. Although there are some straight into the sannyas ashram, you know, they bypass grahastha altogether, like the case of Keshav Maharaj in the UK, who became a sannyasi very, very recently from the Brahmachari ashram. So the king's second duty is to make sure that everyone is well situated in the best possible station of life for their progress. And lastly, we come to the third duty of a king, as is outlined in the purport, which is to see that the citizens are properly looked after to attain the highest stage of perfection. And I was reading Srila Prabhupada's lecture in 1975 in Vrindavan. And he says, you know, so what is the responsibility of the king? The responsibility is that all the citizens, all the inhabitants of the state should live very comfortably and develop Krishna consciousness. This is the responsibility of the king. He has to see that everyone is free from anxiety, everyone is feeling secure, everyone has no disease, no mental anxiety, and in peaceful condition, they are executing Bhagavata Dharma. So that's the purpose of the Varna ashram system, is to situate us very, very well in a place that we're comfortable with, in a place where there aren't, you know, too many frustrations or anxieties. And we can then, you know, spend sort of the mental capacity that we have in pursuing spiritual realization. So then we look at the verse, and as we've mentioned, King Yudhishthira was successful in all these responsibilities. He executed them strictly according to royal principles, approved by his uncle and confirmed by Krishna. So my next question is, who is King Yudhishthira's uncle? Does anyone know? Which uncle is this that's referred to in the verse?
Vidurji?
Actually, thank you, Kishori Mataji. When I first read this verse and purport, I was thinking it is Vidura. I was thinking it is Vidura. But actually, now I think it's someone different, you know, kind of reading back a few verses. I thought it was someone different. Does anyone else want to have another guess as to who else his uncle could be?
The other one was Dhritarashtra. He's only got two uncles, though.
Yes, exactly, Dhritarashtra, yes. So, and another one of the many qualities of Maharaj Yudhishthira was that he was always subservient to his elders. And Dhritarashtra, well, you know, was originally first in line to the throne, but on account of his inherent blindness, the throne went to his younger brother Bandu. And when Bandu died, the throne was supposed to go, you know, in that line of succession to his sons, the Pandavas. But they were too young to ascend at the time, so Dhritarashtra took the throne as the caretaker king until they came of age. However, you know, kind of Dhritarashtra is not only physically blind, but he was spiritually blind too. He was overly attached to his family and, you know, material relationships, and so he wanted to install his son Duryodhan on the throne, who by all accounts was not as qualified as Yudhishthira. So as we know, the Battle of Kurukshetra took place to decide whether the Kauravas or the Pandavas would win, and of course with the not insignificant fact that the Lord was on their side, the Pandavas won. But it wasn't that Yudhishthira, being part of the winning party, then deposed his uncle Dhritarashtra by force. And Prabhupada says in a lecture in Mayapur, June 1973, he said, Not that against the will of Dhritarashtra, Maharaj Yudhishthira accepted the throne. No, he took permission. My dear uncle, now you decide whether we shall become king or you shall remain king. So he said, no, you become king. Now your right is confirmed. So Yudhishthira's kingship was approved by Dhritarashtra. And it was also confirmed by Krishna, as it says in the verse. And Prabhupada again tells us why. From the same lecture in Mayapur 1973, he says, because a king is representative of God. King is not an ordinary person. Just like spiritual master is representative of God, similarly, king is also representative of God. The father is also representative of God. These are the statements of the Shastras, because they will guide. The king will guide. The spiritual master will guide. The father will guide. What is that guidance? That guidance is how one can become Krishna conscious by education, by culture. This is guidance. So Krishna personally sanctioned Yudhishthira's appointment to world emperor because he wanted to leave the Pandavas in a position of authority, because it was the Pandavas who were religious and in charge. They would guide people to become Krishna conscious, whereas Duryodhana was a little too materially minded and very ambitious without being suitably qualified. And the evidence is from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1, verse 1 purport, where it says, as in the paddy field, the unnecessary plants are taken out, so it is expected from the very beginning of these topics that in the religious field of Kurukshetra, where the father of religion, Sri Krishna, was present, the unwanted plants like Dhritarashtra's son Duryodhana and others would be wiped out, and the thoroughly religious persons headed by Yudhishthira would be established by the Lord. So here Prabhupada says, just like you have a paddy field, a rice field, and you take out the unwanted weeds so that the rice plant can grow nicely, in the same way, in the fields of Kurukshetra, which is a place of pilgrimage, as well as the battlefield, Krishna in that religious field took out the irreligious demoniac weeds like Duryodhana, and he established a real valuable crop, which is the thoroughly religious persons like Yudhishthira who would have a beneficial effect on society. So, that's the reason why Lord Krishna personally not only confirmed his appointment, but actually made sure Yudhishthira and the Pandavas were installed on the throne. So then we come to kind of the point in the purport of the verse that Prabhupada is making about the difference between ancient governments and modern governments, which is basically monarchy and democracy. So we've heard in the purport that Prabhupada says that monarchy under a trained king like Maharaj Yudhishthira is by far the most superior form of government, superior to modern republics or governments of the people, by the people. So Prabhupada's views were very much in favor of monarchy and against democracy, which is actually the system a lot of countries have in the world today. And but we have to understand the type of monarchy that he was proposing, the type of monarchy that works. Monarchy, kind of as not just a figurehead who holds no constitutional rights or powers, or, a corrupt head of state, but an absolute monarch who is trained in the principles and who has the citizens' welfare at heart, not just their economic interests, but their spiritual interests too. And he's very much against modern monarchy because, he said the kings misuse their power. And in Mayapur, again, that lecture in June 73, he talks about the history of the monarchical system and why it broke down. So he said, so the monarchy, as soon as it becomes a personal property, the kings thought, this kingdom is mine, I can do whatever I like, and still the kingdom is mine. Then the monarchy was failure. Then from the whole world, the monarchy is now wiped out. So Vedic monarchy is the best system, not the modern style with self-serving kings, and certainly not democracy. So Prabhupada was not a fan of democracy at all. And in Canto 1, chapter 18, verse 43 purport, he elaborates on how modern democracy is not fit for purpose. And, as I was reading them, kind of a lot of things came to mind about what's happening in the world as it is today. So he said there, The Battle of Kurukshetra was planned by the Lord to establish the real representative of the Lord, Maharaj Yudhishthira. An ideal king, thoroughly trained by culture and devotional service with the martial spirit, makes the perfect king. Such a personal monarchy is far better than the so-called democracy of no training and responsibility. The thieves and rogues of modern democracy seek election by misrepresentation of votes, and the successful rogues and thieves devour the massive population. One trained monarch is far better than hundreds of useless ministerial rogues, and it is hinted herein that by abolition of a monarchical regime like that of Maharaj Parikshit, the mass of people became open to many attacks of the age of Kali. They are never happy in an overly advertised form of democracy. So there he's using very strong words like rogues and thieves to describe the people, you know, who lead us and who misrepresent votes and end up devouring the population. So, but it's not just the leaders who are at fault, you know, it's the people who vote them in. And Prabhupada doesn't hold back on what he thinks of mainstream society. You know, in this particular purport, he says, they are all born as Shudras, basically low-born, ill-trained, unfortunate, and badly associated. And in a lecture on this very verse, he makes it clear why. He says the so-called democracy is no good. Democracy means by votes. So the votes are given by the rascal, Sudras. What is the meaning of electing somebody if the vote givers are also rascal and fool, and the vote taker is a big fool, big rascal, that's all. Srila Prabhupada is critical of democracy because it relies on a system of votes which can be misused. And he's pointing out that in Kali Yuga, most people are gullible, most people are easily misled, and their votes are cultivated by dubious characters. And he actually calls democracy demon crazy. So that was the sort of a nice play in words there. And actually, it's interesting that the 12th canto, it does predict this very scenario, you know, that Prabhupada is so critical of. It predicts the failure of modern government, even though, you know, Srimad Bhagavatam was written down 5,000 years ago. And it specifies what will happen in the present age of Kali Yuga. And, you know, kind of it's looking uncannily accurate. So in chapter 2, text 7, it states, as the earth thus becomes crowded with a corrupt population, whoever among any of the social classes shows himself to be the strongest will gain political power. And in text 8, it says, losing their wives and properties to such avaricious and merciless rulers who will behave no better than ordinary thieves, the citizens will flee to the mountains and forests. So not a lot to look forward to, and it behooves us to focus on our spiritual practice and transcend to the spiritual world before the political situation in Kali Yuga becomes worse. But fortunately, Maharaj Yudhishthira is a proper representation of kingly qualities. And we've already heard about many of his qualities, but I'd also like to touch on the fact that he was compassionate and had a tender heart, and was very remorseful that the Battle of Kurukshetra had to take place with the loss of so many lives. And in verse 17 of this chapter, we heard Bhishma Dev console Maharaj Yudhishthira, saying, don't worry, this battle was the plan of the Lord, and even though the plan's inconceivable, we have to follow it. And Bhishma Dev, knowing King Yudhishthira's character, also gave him the instruction in verse 17 to look after his helpless subjects, which, you know, the leaders of today's society don't really think about. So this is the ideal king and leader. He's teaching his subjects how to live so that they can be promoted in the next life, to help them prepare for the final exam, which is death. Which brings us nicely to the final point I would like to touch on. You know, as this is the last verse in the chapter, I'll say a few concluding words about the passing of Bhishma Dev. And so in this chapter, we were witness to Bhishma Dev's, you know, kind of most glorious death, because he was on the level of a Mahajan. He was only a Jiva, but he was on the same platform as Narad, Brahma, and Shiva due to his spiritual perfection. And he was known all over the universe. All the elevated beings, all the sages, the rishis, and the demigods were present at his deathbed, not to mention the Supreme Lord. And he fulfilled the highest objective, the thing that he was meant to do, the thing that we're all meant to do too, which is to think of Krishna. And in this way, he was able to leave the material domain and achieve the spiritual planets. So the highest stage of perfection is to die like Bhishma Dev. And at the end of his time, he did several things. He put his entire self in thinking of the Lord. He also engaged his tongue in chanting the glories of the Lord. He utilized his mind in remembering the Lord. And he used the power of his eyes to see the Lord, who was personally present before him. So all his activities were concentrated on the Lord without deviation. It's not that simple to think of Krishna at death. We will have so many thoughts passing through our minds. We can see that even when we're chanting, we're trying to concentrate and focus on the holy name, but still so many thoughts pass through our minds. But, kind of the fact is that it's Krishna and Krishna only that will mean, that we should be thinking about, that will mean we pass the test. So we need to practice the 9 processes of devotional service throughout our lives in order that we can be ready for the final test. And, these 9 processes are sort of practiced persistently under the guidance of an expert devotee of the Lord or a spiritual master. So, yeah, do we know what they are, the 9 processes of devotional service? I think we've gone through something like this before. I'll give you a clue. The first one is
Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam.
Brilliant.
Padma. Yeah, it's the one that Prahlad Maharaj says in Canto 7, and it ends with Atmanivedana.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you got them all, didn't you? So yeah, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam,
Archanam,
Vandanam,
Sakyam, Dasyam, and Atmanivedan.
Perfect. Yeah, so these are the 9 processes of devotional service, which we can do. We can do one of them, or we can do all of them, like Ambarish Maharaj. And which do we think is the most important? They're all important, but which do we think, comes foremost?
Smaranam. Because after
Smaranam?
hearing or chanting, we have to remember it.
Yeah.
Prahlad Maharaj remembered. So remembering is most important.
Absolutely. And at death, remembering Krishna is of the utmost supreme importance. Does anyone else have any other ideas?
Hearing.
Hearing, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So yes, I was thinking it all starts with hearing, and unless we hear, we won't be able to even remember. So yeah, it starts with hearing, kind of. So what is it that we exactly need to hear? If hearing is the most important, what is it that we need to hear? Does anyone like to have a guess?
Lord's pastimes.
Yes, Lord's pastimes. Brilliant. So yes, so the Lord's pastimes, and in the cream of the Vedic literatures, which, as you are doing, which is Srimad Bhagavatam, but also we mustn't forget the Bhagavad Gita, which is the preliminary stage of study. Bhagavad Gita is described as the ABCD, and then comes, it's the word of God. Then comes Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the graduate study, the activities of God and pastimes. And then Chaitanya Charitamrita is the postgraduate study, which we move on to, which is, really love of God. And Krishna comes in the form of his own devotee to show us how we should love God. So for this serious candidate, for those who want to make themselves eligible to go back to Godhead, this is really essential, and as the book Raj Vidya, the King of Knowledge, chapter 8 states, both Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam are filled with information on how to become Krishna conscious. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu selected these 2 books and requested that people in all corners of the world spread the science of Krishna in every town and village. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was Krishna himself, and we should take this to be Krishna's indication of our proper work. But we should be careful to present Bhagavad Gita as it is without personal interpretation or motivation. Some people present interpretations of Bhagavad Gita, but we should present the words as they are spoken by Sri Krishna. So not only do we need to read, understand, and discuss these literatures, we need to spread them too, which is great because at the moment we have the marathon, and the focus is on distributing Srila Prabhupada's book. So yes, I'm sure a lot of you will be involved in the marathon in the Kenya as well as definitely the UK. So by utilizing the nectar of Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, we should attain to the stage of Bhishma Dev and follow the lead of superior authorities like Maharaj Yudhishthira and go back to Godhead, which is our ultimate aim. So I'll leave it there because we need some time for questions. Thank you so much for listening. Does anyone have any questions or any comments on anything?
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna Shobha Mataji. Nice to see you.
I just wanted to ask, Yudhishthira Maharaj was such an elevated person, but because he was a Kshatriya, he was challenged to gamble by Duryodhana. So was that like part of his dharma? Is that why? Because we sort of prohibit gambling in Krishna consciousness. So was it to set an example to us that how it can kind of ruin your life?
Wonderful question. Thank you so much, Shobha Mataji. So your question was, Yudhishthira was such an elevated person, but then there was the gambling match, kind of was it an example, kind of he's a Kshatriya, so was it an example of how, it can ruin your life and you shouldn't do it? Did I understand you correctly?
Yes, Mataji. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll share my light on this, and then I would like to hear from anyone else if anyone else has a different light to me. But the way I understand it, and you very cleverly picked up on the fact that he's a Kshatriya, but the way I understand it is when a Kshatriya is challenged, then he can never refuse. So I think that's what happens with the gambling match. And there's some different rules here because kind of we have the 4 regulative principles, and we're definitely not allowed to kill anything, but Kshatriyas are allowed to kill animals, aren't they, to practice their kind of skill, their military skills. So I think the rules are different, even though the gambling is against one of our 4 regulative principles, and I think they were allowed to gamble, but I'm not sure. But ultimately, I do think that the whole thing was set up so that, the Battle of Kurukshetra could take place and establish, the religious people on the throne, and so the Bhagavad Gita could be spoken. So I think, that's why they went ahead with it. So that's my take on it. Those 2 things, A, that they were challenged and they went ahead with it, and B, it was Krishna's will. Does anyone else have any different thoughts on Shobha Mataji's question? No, does everyone agree with me?
Yes, Mataji, I think what you said does make sense, that it must be Krishna's plan so that so that the Gita can be spoken and the Kurukshetra wars would take. So that makes sense. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your wonderful question, Shobha Mataji. Yes, because the gambling match always confused me, because I was always thinking, why would stalwarts like Bhishma Dev and Dronacharya, kind of would stay silent, that Draupadi's disrobing, and they were such elevated characters, and why would they just stay silent? And why would they fight on the wrong side? Why would they fight on the side of the Kauravas, when they're so partial to the Pandavas? But ultimately, this is how I explain these things to myself, which don't seem obvious, is that it must be Krishna's will that it happened at all. Any other questions? Yes, Vanshali Mataji.
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you for the wonderful class. Just a very quick question around the Pandavas and when they gave up their material body. So did they not actually go back to the Vaikuntha planets? Why did they go to the heavenly planets?
Yes, and when I was reading that, you know, kind of, and I looked for a few different ISKCON sources on this, so I'd be interested in hearing everyone else's lights. But I was a bit confused and thinking, you know, they went up to the heavenly planets, you know, they went down to hell for a little bit and then to heaven. And I was thinking, why didn't they go back to Godhead? And the only thing I understand is that, you know, the Battle of Kurukshetra, which was a holy site, a holy place of pilgrimage, was, you know, kind of, if you died there in battle, then you would ascend to the heavenly planets. And that was what, you know, kind of Lord Indra gave that boon to King Kuru. So that's what I think, why I think, you know, they ascended to the heavenly planets. And perhaps the other thing I thought was that, you know, kind of the Pandavas are eternal associates of Krishna. And so, you know, in every universe, the sort of pastimes are going on. So I was thinking maybe they ascend to heaven and they come back, you know, to do Krishna's pastimes rather than going back to Godhead, which I believe is a permanent move. So those are my lights. Does anyone else have any other understandings?
Also, Mataji, they were the sons of demigods.
Yes.
All five of them.
Yes, that's a brilliant point. Thank you, Arya Govinda Prabhu. They were the sons of demigods. So yes, it makes sense that they go to the demigod planets.
Thank you, Mataji and Prabhuji.
Thank you. Does that satisfy your question?
Yeah, I think it makes sense now. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Any other questions at all?
No more questions or comments. I'd like to welcome Sada Nandini, who has joined for the first time in this group. So let us chant Haribol three times to welcome Sada Nandini. If possible, you can switch on your
voice. Thank you very much. Thank you. It was so wonderful. I really enjoyed everybody's association. Thank you.
Where are you joining from, Mataji?
I'm in UK. Okay. Yes, I joined by invitation of Adi Ganga Mataji.
Thank you very much for joining in. We meet every day. This group meets every day, even on weekends at the same time, so 5 p.m.
Wow.
So if you would like to join in every day, we'd really appreciate. We have news every day. We have a different speaker, and all of them are fantastic. So if you have the time, we'd really like to welcome you to this very small group.
Thank you for your welcome. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. So
thank you so much for coming, Sada Nandini Mataji. Thank you. She's a good friend of mine. She's one of my discussion partners. So we discussed the Gita together.
That's excellent. Yeah, you need each other's association, like-minded association. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Let us chant three Haribols to welcome Mataji.
Haribol.
Haribol.
Haribol. Haribol.
Hare Krishna. I'll hand over to Path Prabhuji, who's our mentor from Eldoret, to end the session. Path Prabhuji, possible for you to end the session?
Yes, Mataji, Hare Krishna. My internet is not stable, but now it is okay. Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you very much for your nice class. We are not wasting too much time. Already, Mataji describing all the things very nicely. So, also thanks all the devotees who joined here. I request all the devotees, please unmute yourself and chant Hare Krishna mantra for glorification of Her Grace Adi Ganga Devi Dasi. Please join. Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna,
Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vancha kalpa tarubhyascha,
Kripa Sindhu Evacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha.
Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
Jai. Our gracious Adi Ganga Mataji ki Jai.
ISKCON Eldoret ki Jai.
Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Hare Krishna, Hare Bol.
Hare Krishna.